today is Matthew chapter 13, verse 1 through 9 and 18 through 23. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat. And he sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on a path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what is sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what is sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please rise.
At this time, I'd like to invite Steve Carrolls, our brother in Christ, to come forward and speak about his Guatemala mission.
Well, good morning. I am not Pastor Susan, and you should be thankful about that. My name is Steve Carrolls. I'm with Pleasant Street, and I had the opportunity of representing both Pleasant Street and also this church as a missionary off to Guatemala in May of this year. So what I'd like to do today is describe what that mission trip was like with words and with pictures, so that you could actually see what it is to be a missionary and to go on a mission-type trip. So Guatemala is an area of about 42,000 square miles. It has about 16 million people in it. The major language is Spanish, and the other one is the Mayan languages, but there's 21 different dialects. So a village might speak one village, the village next to it speaks another dialect. They cannot communicate with each other. So one of the blessings, if you will, of the Spanish being the universal language is that now Mayans can talk to each other. Some Mayans do not speak Spanish. A lot of them have been trained through the schools and speaking Spanish. There was also a civil war from about November 1960 till December of 1996, primarily but between the Mayans and the government forces. About 200,000 Mayans were killed during that time. So a lot of villages, some villages were slaughtered. There's still villages there that you'll see that if you go, that lack older men, because they all have been killed off. Next slide, please. This is a map. You can see over here in the bottom center shows Guatemala. The top is the United States. There's Mexico. There's El Salvador and Honduras and Belize around the country. Next slide, please. That's a close-up of Guatemala. To the north, in the Mexican area, there's a lot of drug traffic that goes through there. So we do most of our activities in the bottom and the center portion of Guatemala. Next slide, please. The area that we're working at is called Chichicastenango, where the United Methodist Church is working with Saluti Paz, which is a 501c3 organization out of Texas, with a group in Guatemala. And where it's a joint mission between us. There in Chichi-Castanango, there is a school there. There's also a clinic. There's other clinics around and other schools around, but that's the area that we've been primarily working in. This is primarily a Mayan Indian area. Next slide. So in preparation, next slide. I signed up for the team. The mission was the May of this year. This is the third mission I've been on. The other two missions were during 2013. So we had 3 meetings before the actual trip. First meeting is a team introduction, team building. We get together. There were 11 of us on the trip, including Mike Davis, who's a former district superintendent, and Linda Brewster is a reverend who's also a nurse practitioner. She's a member of the United Methodist Church. And initially, the assignment came from Saludi Paz. They wanted a construction team, and so we were prepared to do that. Before the first meeting, they changed their minds because they had a surgical team in the compound for that particular week. When you have a surgical team, you can't have dust being kicked up by the construction team. So they changed this over to a medical team. And Mike Davis panicked because, well, the only one who knew anything about medicine was Linda Brewster, and you can't have a medical team with just one person who knows it. Well, God intervened, and we had 2 other ladies come in, one a registered nurse, Robin, and another one, Margie, who is a retired nurse practitioner. And so that formed the core for us, and the rest of us were untrained in medical, but there was training that was provided. So meeting number 1 was team introduction. We met the other people on our team, and there was a book assignments. So there's a list of books on Guatemala. I chose a particular book on a Mayan woman who she basically participated in the revolution, and what her life life experience was as she went through it. It gave you a very interesting idea or interesting insight into the Mayan culture, what's important to them. The second meeting was medical training, because as I mentioned, 8 of us of the 11 people had no medical training. So I learned how to do blood pressures. I learned how to do take blood glucose, temperature, the simple things, and we got trained. We also had forms that we had to do. We had medical release forms. We had insurance forms, conduct forms, etc. It's just as well organized. So you basically go through and you sign it. And part of the medical form is so that in case someone gets into trouble in Guatemala, the people there on the team have authorization to have medical activities done for the person. The insurance stuff also covers medical evacuation out of the country, should that be required. Now, no one has ever required this on the teams that have gone from the Pleasant Street, or I should say from the United Methodist Church in our New England Conference, but it's nice to have it there. The third meeting, we had book reports that are optional. I gave a report on what I had read. Some of the people gave one. And we had last-minute readiness, including, list of what we needed to bring with us, and conduct, and also safety issues. And then after we got back, we had a barbecue at Jen and Mike Davis's place, and so we had a big reunion. Next slide, please. So what does it cost? It's personal cost. It's about $2,000 per person, and one payment of $1,000 is due up front for the air travel. They make a group reservation, and the balance is $1,000. In addition to that cost, there's also costs associated with the trip itself, about $4,000 for the medical drugs, and there's hiring the interpreters and transportation. All that sort of raised up by the 2 leaders. Of course, you need a passport to be able to get in and out of the country, and you need immunizations, typically hepatitis A, typhoid, and tetanus. I think I also had hepatitis B because I was working in a medical clinic and there's possibility of exposure to blood. So next slide. So what do the trips cover? Well, they cover flights, the hotels, the meals, tips, all the interpreter services. Basically, you can go there and with the exception of 1 or 2 meals, everything is covered. And what it does not cover local purchases. You can buy a storm of stuff. They had one trip where a young man bought so much stuff he had to buy additional suitcases to carry them back to the United States. So you can buy a lot of stuff. It doesn't cover the meals at the airports, and it doesn't cover special events like some people go on zip lines or other recreational stuff. so it doesn't cover that. Next slide, please. So some of the team rules. Do not leave the hotel at night. This is I think it's the poorest country in Latin America. It's something like third or fourth poorest in the world. There are some violent people there who will do whatever they have to do to get your money. So it's not good to go out at night. In fact, we don't travel the roads at night. In our bus, even though it's a bus, we don't go out at night. So we make sure that we're at the place we need to be before sunset. Always go someplace with at least one teammate. No walking out by yourself. And that's primarily safety reasons. If something happens, it's always good to have another person there. Get back. Let the team leaders know where you are going and when you will return. So again, common sense stuff, but has to be followed. Two important things are be flexible and Guatemalan time. Next slide, please. So learn that Guatemalan time is much slower than US time. Here we tend to be, I'm going to be here at 9 o'clock, I will be here at 9 o'clock. I'm here at 9:10, I'm late. Not so in Guatemala. Somebody says they're going to be here at 9 o'clock, well, maybe by 11 o'clock they show up if you're lucky. Sometimes they don't show up at all. So it's much slower form of lifestyle than the US. Flexibility. Things will not go as planned. Some things you think are important are really not. And learn to adapt. This is one of the really good features of going on the trip is you learn that life happens. And things sometimes happen that you don't expect. You have to be able to adapt and be flexible. Next slide. This is our team. Gloria is a student from, I believe, Kenya. She was here. The rest, people whose names are red, they are medically trained. There's Linda Brewster, Margie, and Robin. Robin's the registered nurse, and the other two are nurse practitioners. Sarah has spent some time in South America and was fluent in Spanish. Peter over there was my roommate. He's a retired chemist, and he's learning Spanish. It's turned out to be very useful. Mike Davis is over there, a typical troublemaker, great humorist, and it was a joy to have along. And there's a picture of me, the mad scientist working in the lab. Next slide. So for our main mission trip, next slide, we started out on the 10th of May. This is a Saturday. I got up about 3 o'clock in the morning. My daughter took me to the Boston airport. Some of the other people from the Maine area had come in overnight and spent the night in Boston. I arrived at 5:30. Airplane was scheduled to take off at 8 o'clock. And of course, the first flexible thing happens. The airline gets canceled that particular flight. And we had chosen that flight so that we would get into Guatemala City around noontime or so, have enough time to transport up to Chichicastenango, about 3 or 4 hours away. Well, that didn't happen. So American pushed us over to going through Houston at a later flight, which meant that we had to spend the night in Antigua, another place a little closer, and didn't make Chichicastenango the first night. In addition, we're carrying large amounts of drugs for the mission trip. Now, these had been coordinated with Guatemala Customs, but that doesn't mean too much because the customs agents are sort of independent, and if they don't like what you're doing, they'll just confiscate it. So it was a major concern to us. So we had two suitcases, one that we carried with our personal stuff, and the second was a team suitcase that we brought in. And we're going down the aisle and through off the gate and coming to customs, and there's a Spanish lady there, and she's pointing this way or this way. If you go this way, then it goes off to Guatemala Customs, otherwise it just goes out to the parking lot. Well, of the 11 of us, the only one who got diverted to the customs was Kim, and she, in her suitcase, was just some toys for some kids. So we got through okay. Didn't have any problems at all. In terms of the route coming down, you can see Boston up there on the upper right. Instead of going down through Florida, through Miami, and then down, we went through Houston and then came down. Later flight meant a later arrival time. Next slide, please. Well, what do you do at airports? You sit there and wait. That's what the picture of this one is. Sitting there, waiting around, waiting for the next flight. You can see some of the people in our team are there. Next one. And when we arrived, we got out the door, and there's the Sluripaz people there with Archie as our driver. He speaks English and Spanish, and he's loading up the truck. That's Mike Davis, that you can see his back of his bald spot. And we're all loaded up. Next slide. There we are checking into the hotel in Antigua. Pretty standard stuff. I get roomed up with Peter. Peter's the guy on the far left. And the one in the black or white stripes is Jose. He's our translator. He speaks English, Spanish, and Quiche. Next slide. And so what happened was we got diverted from Guatemala City and went to Antigua, showing the lower bottom, instead of going up to Chichicastenango for the first day. Next slide, please. So now Sunday the 11th, this is Mother's Day. And my wife still hasn't forgiven me for being gone on Mother's Day, but she'll get over it. We had breakfast in Antigua. We bused to Chichicastenango, about 3 hours away, did lunch, and then went out into the marketplace for a while. And then Juan Toy is one of the founders of Slutipaz. Slutipaz, as I mentioned, is a 501c3 organization dedicated to improving the quality of life of Mayan Indians in Guatemala. Juan is originally from, he's a Mayan Indian from Guatemala, spent some time in the US, and then he and a dentist, retired dentist, formed the Slutipaz. And the United Methodist Church's team with that organization to do this type of mission work. We went to Juan's church, the National Methodist Church, saying Santos, Santos, Santos in Spanish, and we made it through, and no one threw onions at us, so that was good. Had the dinner at the hotel, and each night we had a communion service. So we got to talk about the day's activities and have communion together. Next slide. So here it shows that we're walking in Antigua. You can see the cobblestone type of roads that they have, and it's a pretty place. Next slide, please. Again, diversion from, we're going to take a trip from Antigua up to Chichicastenango. Next slide. And here we're loading up the bus heading off to Chichi. Next slide. Now that sign up there says Happy Mother's Day in Spanish, and this was a team shot. And I'm there in the back so my wife couldn't tell that I was really on the trip. So next slide, please. So then it's Monday, and we have 4 days of medical mission work to do. And we have a team breakfast, and then we travel about 50 minutes by bus to this little village. And we set up the facility in the school building very quickly. And that day we saw 65 patients. The last time a medical team was there was about November of last year. And I started learning how to do lab testing. I got assigned to do lab testing, which means I worked in blood and urine. And I had never done this before in my life. But, you know, got my bachelor's in physics, and I used to be a chemistry major, and so I figured I was okay with it. So I set up and I did my stuff. One guy had one patient that came in had a blood glucose of 458. Now, a typical blood glucose is like 120. I was amazed that he was actually able to stand, but he was living with it. He got issued some, every patient gets issued about 60 days worth of vitamins and then whatever medicine. He got some diabetic medicine issued to him. And then at the evening, we had evening discussion events and communion as usual. Next slide, please. There's a road. You can see there's a slight blur because we're bouncing around on the road as I took my picture. And it's not untypical to see the little concrete tracks going up so that you can get traction during the wet season. Next slide. And that's the town facility that we got. You can see it's just a big community meeting area, real dusty and kind of dirty. Some windows are open, some are just got glass in them. Some got a little bit of screen. Temperature is about the same temperature as today during that time. Next slide, please. So here we're starting to set up. You can see the chairs in there. That's a triage center. A triage is where the patients first come in. They've gone through the receptionist. They paid their 10Q, which is about $1.50 for coming in. If they can't afford it, they'll still come in. But they come into triage, and they get the medical history, and they get blood pressure and temperature, and then they get assigned to a practitioner. And so there's a series of chairs that they move through. The medical practitioner may ask for a laboratory test, and they would then come down to me, and I would read the sheet, see what they needed, do the tests, and then right on the sheet, and then return it to them, and they would sit back and go back to the medical practitioner. At the end, they would typically go to the pharmacist, be issued whatever medicine that they need, and then they would go. Next slide, please. So there shows the triage table in action. You can see the curtains drawn over there. That's where the examination rooms are. Next slide. And there's the mad scientist that worked me. And I got my gloves on. I got my medical uniform on. Some of the Mayans thought I was a doctor. Hey, I don't know it, but I can at least look the part, right? So got my gloves on, and I had a little cheat sheet in Spanish that I could talk and ask for urine samples, or I was going to prick their finger for a blood test or whatever. And that's what I did. Next slide. That's the examination rooms. About 90% of the patients are women. And a lot of it is gynecological exams going on. And so obviously the privacy is important. Those are two different rooms, just hung together with clothesline. Next slide. And that's our trip back. And it doesn't sound like much, sitting at a table doing stuff, but it's tiring. It is, it's hard work, but it's good work also. You can see the cobblestone wood changing over there. A lot of motorcycles over there. The price of gas is about $5 a gallon. And that's what's going on. Next slide, please. So the next day, again, we start off with a team breakfast. That day was to a different town, which I can't pronounce. We saw 72 patients that day. And one of the interesting things was, in the lab, I was also responsible for doing nebulizers. Nebulizers are where you have to get medicine into the person's pulmonary system, breathing system. And there was a young child, young boy, a baby, really, that couldn't breathe, starting to turn blue. Mother had brought him in. And a nurse practitioner came over, and she told me how to do the nebulizer stuff. And the child did not like having this mask on his face. But within about 10 to 15 minutes, he could start breathing again. And it was really remarkable to see a child that was near death, that was probably going to die within a few days, all of a sudden become better, just because of a simple application. A man also showed up with his daughter. They took a look at her. She had a very serious heart murmur. We checked it out with Sluty Paws to make sure this was really genuine. And the team volunteered to take some of its funds and I think a couple $100 and get the man so that he could go see the daughter could go see a cardiologist in Guatemala City. Medicine is not free in Guatemala, so it is expensive. That was really nice, and we're hoping to hear some results back as to what happened. Next slide. So again, you can see another facility, concrete block type facility. You can see the corrugated type of a tin roof, and we're just starting to set up there. You can see Mike Davis in the red hat at the end, at the middle. Next slide. And this is their where I dispose of the urine samples. Now, as I mentioned, I work in blood and urine on the test. So at the urine thing after the sample, I set it aside. When the patient leaves, I take it and I put it into the latrine. Next slide. This is one of the nicer latrines. They worked great for about 3 hours until the public water ran out, and then it wouldn't flush. But that was one of the nicer ones. Next slide. This is the pharmacy. The pharmacy consists of suitcases full of medicines. They're organized by type of medicines. For instance, it could be vitamins, it could be painkillers, it could be antibacterial stuff. And the 4 people assigned to the pharmacy, they work all this stuff. And so, not like you see in the U.S. with a nice little pharmacy. This is really primitive. Next slide. Here's some waiting people. Notice the great colored dresses that the ladies have, and a couple of little kids waiting in line. Next slide. Okay, on Wednesday the 14th, we had team breakfast. Drove an hour plus to Lacima 1. And when they have villages with the same name, they'll just attach a number to the end of it to differentiate it. And this has been the first time any medical team has ever been there. And there was a big thunderstorm the previous night, so we got there when there's no electricity at all. So we had to make maximum use of ambient light. And this is, again, inside a building, so it's not like there's much choice. We saw 75 patients that day. And the entire village welcomed us and carried our luggages in, the drugs and stuff, and out. They were very, very appreciative. It was very, very nice. Next slide. That's the lunch table. Typically for lunch, we'd shut down an hour for lunch and have a ham and cheese sandwich or something. And that's a couple of our interpreters. We would also hire local interpreters. Now, as I mentioned, the team spoke English, the national language is Spanish, and the local dialect is Quiche. So we had team members that would speak only English, that would have a translator that would translate into Spanish. And then there'd be a local translator that go from Spanish into Quiche, and then back and forth. So it made conversations very interesting. And you can see off to the right side, that's in the yellow, that's Peter, my roommate. He's part of the pharmacy team. Next slide. That's a couple outside during lunch break, father and mother and the little daughter. And it was just, they're very peaceful. It was a nice shot. Next slide. That's people waiting to come in. Again, you can see the beautiful colors and the Mayan women in their clothes and what's noted for them. Next slide. Again, maximum use of natural light because there wasn't any electricity, and sheets were up for privacy purposes. Next slide. And that's our pharmacy work. Mike Davis was working there, Robin in the back, and again, Peter. Peter was the one he's been taking Spanish lessons, and he wound up being talking to the patients about how to use their medicine. And so he got a lot of work on his Spanish. He did a really good job. Next slide. Okay, then the Thursday we had a team breakfast as usual, and went to the village of Chimel, about 20 minutes away, relatively close. Now, market day is an important part of the Guatemalan culture, especially in the rural areas. They have Sunday and Thursday that they do market days. So they bring either their food to sell, or they go out to buy food, or they have goods that they sell or buy there. And so it was very slow during the morning, probably only 30 patients by 1 p.m. And then all of a sudden, 49 patients showed up at the end, and we had lots of stuff. I've been praying all week about, Lord, I sure would like to do a pregnancy test because I hadn't done it all week, and I want to make sure I got it right. And the Lord answered me by having 5 women come in. 2 women were happy that they were pregnant, and 3 were also very happy that they were not pregnant. And so that was an interesting time. Next slide, please. That's the back of the facility. Now, I was working right inside that window on the inside, and that white cube over there is the latrine. And so after I would get the urine sample from typically a woman, and they're very, very private about it. So they would cover it up and bring it in and lay it on a table, and I would do their stuff and write on their chart and put it on the floor. I'd wait for them to leave, and then I would take that sample and go around the side to the end and open up and dispose of it, and change my gloves and use hand sanitizer to be real safe. Next slide, please. That's the inside of it. That was a really disgusting looking toilet, and so that was probably the worst one of the series. Next slide. There's the outdoor triage that they're doing, and again, the 2 Americans, and then a translator, and then the patients being serviced. Next slide. Okay, Friday the 15th was an immersion day where we got to go into the Guatemalan culture a little bit. And we visited homes and a school and also a clinic. We had lunch at Juan's church, and we also saw, I do this village water purification system that I designed up and sent down to Guatemala last year, and I actually saw one of them in operation at a local school. It's designed to service 200 people, basically neutralizes the bacteria and protozoa that are in the water. And I was told by the school principal, that's in government Guatemalan types, were very impressed with it because it's relatively low cost and it's also very convenient, but of course they have no money. And then at the end of the day, we traveled to Panajachel for the next portion of our trip. Next slide. So there's in the local clinic, and off to the far left is our translator. We have a nurse there, the administrator of the clinic, and then our team members. And It's a nice building. It's not quite totally complete, but it's adequate. Services, I think, around 600 or 700 people, and I think I have more drugs in my own medicine cabinet than they have in theirs. It's not well supplied. The nurses have, as of May, had not been paid for 5 months. Guatemala is a little bit short on money, and so they sometimes don't pay their staff. Next slide. There's one of my water purification systems that was installed working at a school, and you push the button and bad water goes in and good water comes out. So that was really nice. I got to talk to the school principal, and we went over the test results of the local testing, and everything was good. So that was a success. It only burns a few watts worth of power, so it's a lot more economical than burning wood to boil water. And there's also less carbon footprint that way. Next slide. Well, we visited a local home. You can see the adobe type of construction, the clay construction, and of course the heavy use of the roof because it rains a lot during the rainy season. And this is a woman with, I think she had 3 kids, and that's Peter, my roommate.
So what kind of roof is that?
It's so like a ceramic clay type of roof. You see these down in Florida quite a bit.
I saw storm roofs or something before, like thatch.
That was more decorative. Okay. Next slide. This is this is in a rural area, an isolated home. And part of the peace treaty from the Civil War was that water was made available to the Mayans, and water and electricity. And so each house has got electricity, and each one's got some water. Now the water is not purified; it just comes out of a local stream, so it's got a lot of vectors in it, bacteria and protozoa. Makes the people that chronically have dysentery type problems. And this is where they not only wash their dishes with, but also brush their teeth and get their water. And so we're looking at a way to, in the rural side, to put a rural water purification system in. That's maybe 2015. So next slide. Back one. This is on the way to This is on the way to Panajachel. This is like Atelian, and it's really a scenic view as you come down. And again, keep in mind that Guatemala there's like, I think it's 17 or 21 volcanoes in there. So there's just hills all over the place. So I'm really thankful I wasn't driving, because I look off the side of the bus and the hills going down about a 60-degree angle. And so I wonder that they can drive there at all. Next slide. So from Chichicastenango, we went down to Panajachel into that big lake. And the lake, you say, oh, wonderful, you like go swimming. No, the water's contaminated. You don't want to swim there. You'll get sick. Next slide. So the day of 17th is a relaxation day featuring some shopping, a swim in the hotel's pool. Don't drink the water, even though it's pool water. Hasn't been treated with chlorine. Not good for you. I purchased my own lunch, one of the few meals not covered by the trip, and as I was doing some shopping, and I had some pizza, because you can't eat the fruit or the vegetables there because they are contaminated. But I figured if you got a pizza and they cooked the heck out of the cheese, I should be okay. So that's what I got. Next slide. There's Peter, my roommate, and we're 2 of us together. Remember the rules. Everybody has to go. Any place you go, you have to have another team member with you. And he's walking by. You can see some of the goods around. Next slide. And remember the beautiful colors that you see in the Mayan fabrics, Guatemalan fabrics. That's really, really nice. I picked up some stuff for my wife. Next slide. And some other interesting tidbits that you can get. Next slide. This is a place we stayed in at Panajachel. And really nice, 2 people to a room. The thatched stuff is more decorative than it is functional. And it was nice. You still could not drink the water there. Do not take a toothbrush and run it under the water, because you'll get sick. So you have to be very, very careful. Everybody has their own bottles of water. You can go to the local hotel and get purified water, agua purifa. And it's been water that has been boiled or otherwise disinfected, and tank up on that. And that's what I drank during the trip. Next slide. So now comes the day of return, Sunday. And we get up, have breakfast on early from that hotel. You just go across the street. There's a hotel slash cafeteria place there. It has some nice thick pancakes, and had a good time. We then traveled about 2.5 hours to Guatemala City, to the airport there. This is a warm airport. There is no air conditioning there. So we made it through the Guatemalan customs to get out, and then we hit Miami. And we hit a long, long, long line that just sort of snaked all over the place. And I was the last one to get on board, had my luggage with me that I checked in at the gate. And of course, everything went bad. Got into Boston. My cell phone by this time the battery had died. The luggage was lost. The team went on. Usually they would leave someone behind, but I told them, no, I got a daughter to come and pick me up. Eventually I was able to get a hold of my wife. I gave her the wrong terminal number, and she gave the wrong terminal number to my daughter, so they missed us for a while. And eventually I got picked up. And, but that's okay. I learned flexibility. Have to be able to adapt. Next slide. So the next day, Monday, I took the day off from work, arrived home around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. And the good news is this time I didn't get sick. So I had been really careful. And I received lost luggage late that day. So in summary, 285 Mayan Indians were treated. For many of them, this was the first time they've ever seen a medical person ever. One woman was prayed over a dog bite. Now, dogs in the U.S. Are typically family pets. Well, dogs in Guatemala sort of run in packs, and they're usually guard dogs, and they're not really well protected against rabies. And here is a local woman who received a dog bite. And you can't really go through the rabies treatment if you're only there for one day. And so the group of us got around and we prayed for her, and some of it got translated into Spanish. And she was just so happy and relieved that someone actually cared enough about her to do something at all. But that was really nice. What I sort of realized is, when we're here in a relatively safe environment, sometimes God's miracles seem awful distant. But when you're there on the front lines on a missionary, God seems really close. And for me, that was important. That was very good. So was it worth the time and cost? Well, yeah, it was. Would I go again as I was writing up this? I said, well, maybe, and gee, I guess I need some time to recover, and probably I will, and yeah, I guess I will. So that's my journey. Any questions? Thank you very much. Thank you.
So are there scholarships or grants or something like that if people want to go and can't quite come up with the money to go?
I don't know that there are grants. What some people do is either raise money through their local churches or go through crafts and arts and sell things that way. I know several people who are in that situation and are building up the funds that they need in order to go.
Well, that's wonderful. Wonderful to hear about what we're doing in Guatemala. And if you want to go, let us know, and we'll look toward maybe helping with the cost of it. Do you need a mic?
My son lives in Florida, and what he considers a cool spell, I find it hot. So the people have adapted somewhat to living in that environment. We're up around 7,000 to 11,000 feet high, so we're above the insect level, the mosquito level. And the weather there typically, you know, is the 70s to 80s. Some of the team members would wear long material to keep sunburn issues down. Ladies were advised to not have bare shoulders or bare knees because of cultural issues. So those are some of the constraints that came in. Guatemalans, it was very interesting. I saw a young woman, oh, by the way, the Guatemalan ladies, the females, they usually, if they're 15 years old, they're considered an old maid. You know, they usually get married by about 14. And they'll take a child and put it on his back and put a blanket around, and then bring one over his shoulder and tie it like this and bring it under, and that's how they carry their kids. And a lot of the women will have, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, maybe 13 kids. So it's definitely a different environment that we live in than Guatemala.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so if you want more information or to make plans to go, please let Steve know. And if you need his contact information, you can easily get that. We know where to find you.